Okay, let's talk about one of rock history's biggest, well, paradoxes. We're talking about a band that basically taught a music icon everything he knew, and in doing that, they ended up shaping the sound of an entire generation. And that icon? Yeah, it was Kurt Cobain. His praise for the Melvins was, you can't get much higher. He apparently called them the greatest band in the world. That's a massive statement, right? Especially coming from the guy who was about to define the entire sound of the 90s.
So, that leads us to the real mystery here, the big question of this whole story. If the Melvins were the teachers, the godfathers of grunge, the band that literally lit the fuse for Nirvana, why didn't they get the millions? Why didn't they hit it big?
All right. To figure that out, we got to go back, way back to the beginning, back to the place where their totally unique and, let's just say it, weird sound first crawled out of the woodwork. See? The Melvins didn't pop up in some cool, bustling music hub. Nope. They formed back in 1983 in these tiny, isolated logging towns in Washington state. You know, the kind of place with endless gray skies and just this heavy feeling in the air. That bleak, gloomy atmosphere, that's what forged their sound.
So what kind of sound comes out of a place like that? Well, they pretty much invented a whole new genre we now call sludge metal. At the time, punk was all about going faster, faster, faster. The Melvins, they did the exact opposite. They took all that raw punk attitude and just slowed it down, way down, to the speed of a band like Black Sabbath. It was heavy, crushing even. Their formula was just something else. Think about it. They mixed the massive, heavy weight of doom metal with punk's get-in-your-face attitude. Then they threw in all this experimental noise, really abrasive sounds, and song structures that went wherever they wanted. It basically put them in this weird no-man's land. They were too heavy for the punks, but way too punk for the metalheads. And, this sound they were creating wasn't just happening in some vacuum. It was being heard, and it was directly shaping the mind of this young, kind of outcast kid from their same hometown, a kid named Kurt Cobain. And when I say shaping, I don't mean he just liked their records. This was a full-on, hands-on mentorship. The band's frontman, Buzz Osborne, was Kurt's musical guide. He's the guy who introduced him to all this punk and metal. And the drummer, Dale Crover, he was even more involved. He literally taught Kurt how to play guitar and was one of the very first drummers for Nirvana. So picture this. In the early 80s, you've got a young Kurt Cobain who's basically a fly on the wall at every Melvins practice, just soaking it all in. Fast forward to 1988, and Dale Crover is the guy playing drums on Nirvana's very first demo. Then, just 1 year later, Nirvana drops Bleach, and that album is just drenched in the Melvins' sludgy, heavy sound. The connection? It's not even a question, it's undeniable. So what did Kurt actually learn from them? You could almost call it the Cobain curriculum. He learned how to play their weird, unconventional riffs. He mastered that quiet verse, loud chorus thing. The dynamic shift that would become a total Nirvana trademark. He copied their sludgy guitar tones, and, maybe most importantly, he learned how to write songs that didn't care about predictable pop formulas. Okay, so we've established that the Melvins are the OGs, the influential originators. So what happened when the mainstream, finally came calling? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting.
Right. So after Nirvana just exploded onto the scene, every major record label was scrambling to find the next Nirvana. It was a total gold rush. And in 1993, they went right to the source. The Melvins signed a big 3-album deal with Atlantic Records. This was it. This was their shot.
But this is where that paradox we talked about just smacks you in the face. See, Nirvana, for all their noise, had this raw pop sensibility. It's what made them MTV darlings and sold millions of records. The Melvins, they were just unapologetically weird. Their biggest album for Atlantic, Houdini, sold about 100,000 copies. That's not bad, but it's a completely different universe from Nirvana's sales. They just stayed stubbornly, authentically themselves.
So why didn't it work on a massive scale? Well, for starters, their sound was way too abrasive for the radio. Their whole vibe was just bizarre, sometimes kind of grotesque, and they absolutely refused to change it for anybody. And at the end of the day, a huge company like Atlantic they had no clue what to do with a band that was this fiercely original.
Yeah, it was really just a classic case of a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. They just didn't fit into that big commercial machine. And you know what? I don't think they ever wanted to. And that really brings us to the answer, doesn't it? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question this whole time.
Maybe for a band like the Melvins, success was never about selling millions of records.
Just look at this. They've released over 25 studio albums. Think about that. This isn't some band that had a moment and then disappeared. This is a relentless, unstoppable creative machine that's just kept going year after year. So what did they get instead of those platinum plaques? Well, they got complete creative control, total artistic integrity. They got the deep respect of generations of other amazing musicians, bands like Tool and Mastodon, who all point to them as a huge influence. And they got a cult following that is fiercely loyal and loves them because they're weird, not in spite of it.
So, yeah, they never got the millions, but what they got instead was something you could argue is way more valuable, at least to them. The freedom to be total weirdos forever, on their own terms.
And that kind of leaves us with one last question to think about, right? In the world of music, what's actually worth more? A few years of massive fame and millions of dollars? Or a timeless, weird, and deeply influential legacy?